What's going on? Here we are for a summary of Chapter 4 of The Great Gatsby. This chapter is one of my favorites just because there's just so much that goes on in this chapter. It's almost stupid how much goes on in this chapter. Let's jump into it here, shall we? Chapter 4, we learn more about Gatsby and his whole deal. We also meet a character by the name of Meyer Wolfsheim, and we'll get into Meyer here in just a little bit. So, at the beginning of Chapter 4, Nick starts off by detailing all these rich and famous people that show up at Gatsby's party. There's actors and actresses, dancers and musicians, producers, writers, directors, everybody from show business, both stage and the newly formed screen industry. There's bankers, brokers, businessmen, all there. He says, I can still read the gray names, and they will give you a better impression than my generalities of those who accepted Gatsby's hospitality and paid him the subtle tribute of knowing nothing whatever about him. This is Nick's way of telling us that anybody who's anybody in society ends up at one of Gatsby's parties. But they show up to drink his booze and eat his food and dance on his dance floor to the music he provides. It's not about being friends with the man. This is one of Fitzgerald's big critiques on relationships, not just in the 1920s, but between people in general. And we'll get into that a little bit more later on. This is where Nick gets the opportunity to know Gatsby. Gatsby shows up bright and early one morning in his beautiful car, and he says, come on, we're going to lunch today. This is the car that was used in the movie. Now, this car is not time period authentic. Okay, this car would not be produced until about 10 years after the setting of the movie. But it is necessary for showmanship in the movie. Nick describes it for us. He says it was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down behind many layers of glass in a sort of green leather conservatory, we started a town, Fitzgerald 69. Now, this car is such a metaphor for everything that is bad about the 1920s. Cream is a yellow. Yellow is equated with gold, which equals money. Talks about royalty, richness, success. And green is envy, or the desire to possess things that other people have. This car represents the bigger, better, faster lifestyle that everyone was striving for in the 1920s. It becomes a rolling metaphor for everything that's wrong with the decade. But Nick and Gatsby hop in this car, and they are headed to town. And Gatsby goes into great detail. He's like, he says, oh, I'm the son of some very rich people. Unfortunately, they're all dead now. I was educated at Oxford. My family died, left me a tremendous amount of money. Then I traveled the world. And then came the war. I accepted a commission as a first lieutenant, commanded 2 machine gun detachments in the Argonne Forest, and then I was promoted to major. And I was awarded medals from every allied nation, even the little country of Montenegro. And then he freaking pulls a medal out of his coat pocket. He's like, check it out. Here's my medal from Montenegro to Major J. Gatsby for valor extraordinary. Who carries a war medal with them in their pocket? I mean, seriously. And then he's like, oh, here's something else I carry around with me all the time, too. Here's a picture of me and some guys at Oxford. The guy on the left there is the Duke of Dorchester now. It's like, seriously, dude, who carries these things around with them in their coat pocket? He's got a very specific reason for this. Now, look what he says to Nick. He says, I'm going to make a big request of you today, so I thought you ought to know a little something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. It's very important to Nick, or very important to Gatsby, sorry, that he put all of the rumors to rest that Nick may have heard about him. He wants Nick to know that he really is somebody. He says, I've got a big favor to ask you later today. Jordan's going to take you to tea, and then you guys can talk about it. And Nick's like, well, come on. We don't want to talk about it now? He's like, no, I'll have Jordan talk to you about it later. So they cruise on into town, and as they're coming across the Bay Bridge, Nick says something. He says, the city seen from the Queensboro Bridge, the city seen for the first time. He says he sees something that's a little strange. There's 3 young Negroes being driven around in a car by a white person. A little casual racism here from Fitzgerald. Totally acceptable in the time period. He says, as we crossed that bridge, I thought that anything could happen. Even Gatsby in all his impossibility. So they go to lunch and they meet this dude by the name of Meyer Wolfsheim. Now, Meyer, again, is described as, Nick describes him as a small, flat-nosed Jew. Again, a little more casual racism there. And they are in a secret club. They're in what's known as a speakeasy. Now, remember, this is the time of Prohibition. The public consumption and sale and distribution of alcohol was outlawed. You couldn't buy it, you couldn't transport it, you couldn't make it. But here they are, the first thing Gatsby orders is highballs. That's tall, skinny glasses with ice and whiskey. So they go in, and Gatsby grabs Meyer by one arm and grabs Nick by an arm and walks them into the club. And Nick's getting to know Meyer Wolfsheim a little bit, whose name, by the way, Wolfsheim in German means wolf's home. And he says, so, I hear you're looking for a business connection. Not connection, connection. Pronounces it with that kind of slurred letters. And Gatsby says, no, Meyer, this isn't that guy. This is the other guy I told you about, the friend I was going to introduce you to today. And he's like, oh, my mistake. And then he starts bragging up Gatsby. He's like, oh, I knew he was a man of distinction the moment I met him. And then Nick notices he's got a very unique set of cufflinks. Human molars. He's got a set of human teeth that have been turned into cufflinks. And Meyer gets up to leave after Gatsby comes back, and Nick's like, who is this dude? Is he an actor? Is he a producer? He's like, no, Meyer, he's a gambler. He's the man who fixed the 1919 World Series. For those of you familiar with sports history, the Chicago Black Sox scandal, when the White Sox were convinced to throw the World Series so they could all make a bunch of money off of it. Let's put a little bit of this together here, shall we? You've got a guy who Gatsby describes as a gambler. And they're having lunch in a speakeasy, and he's wearing a set of human teeth. Meyer Wolfsheim is obviously a gangster or a bootlegger. We're starting to get some hints here as to where Gatsby might make his money from. So as they're getting ready to leave the speakeasy, Nick sees Tom. Tom says, oh, Daisy's so insulted you haven't been back to the house. Oh, what are you doing here? I never expected to see you in a place like this. He says, oh, I've been hanging out with Mr. Gatsby. And Gatsby and Tom exchange a very awkward handshake. And Tom turns back to Nick, and Nick goes, yeah, we just came into lunch together. And he turns around and Gatsby's gone. Very odd. So later that day, he hears this story about Gatsby's past from Jordan. Apparently, he knew Daisy before the war. She was 18. He was a young soldier who was stationed there. She dated a lot of young men. She was very popular. She was one of the aristocrats in Louisville, Kentucky. And after Gatsby went away to war, she still dated around with guys who couldn't get drafted for whatever reason. Flat feet, poor eyesight, whatever. And there were rumors circulating that she tried to sneak off and go somewhere to go say goodbye to one of her soldier friends. And then, the next June, she married Tom Buchanan. He had come down with a fleet of cars from Chicago, booked an entire local hotel, gave her a string of pearls that was worth $350,000. That's almost $5.5 million today, guys. And the night before she and Tom were supposed to get married, Jordan found Daisy drunk as a skunk. And Daisy had thrown the pearls in the garbage can, and she's sitting on the bed with a bottle of wine and the garbage can, and she fishes in the garbage can. She says, here, dearest, take these back to whoever they belong to. Tell them Daisy's changed her mind. Say, Daisy's changed her mind. She was clutching this letter, and Jordan was terrified. She had never seen Daisy like this before. So got her all gathered up and into the bathtub, and she wouldn't let go of the letter. The letter finally just disintegrated in the tub. But the next day, just like it was planned, she married Tom Buchanan. And from that point on, she seemed so in love with Tom, she always asked where he was what he was doing when he wasn't around. Not too long after that, Tom was in a car accident, and the young woman who was in his car broke her arm, and she was one of the chambermaids in the hotel where Tom and Daisy were staying. Apparently, Tom was a cheating bastard even then. And then they moved to from there to Chicago, or moved from there to overseas, from overseas to Chicago, from Chicago to New York, where they are now. And Jordan finds out that all these parties that Gatsby has been throwing have been for Daisy. He bought the house across from her so he could be close to her, and he just hoped that she would wander through his door one night and they could reconnect like nothing had ever happened. He has a simple request of Nick. He wants Nick to invite her over for tea so they can reconnect. So Nick makes the promise that he will do that. And Nick puts his arm around Jordan and just kind of forgets about all the craziness. He says, he just thought in his mind, he says, there's only the pursued, the pursuing, the busy, and the tired. But he forgets all about it when he puts his arm around Jordan and she kind of leans her head into his shoulder. So, that ends chapter 4. I'll see you next time for chapter 5.